Hello, boys and girls. I miss you guys so much. Today we're going to be reading chapter 10 of The Mouse and the Motorcycle. But before we do, I wanted to go over a few important words that we're going to come across in the chapter that are kind of tricky. So I want to make sure you know what they mean before we come to them. First of all, the chapter that we're going to be reading today is called The Anxious Night. So I wanted to talk about what the word anxious means. So anxious, we'll find this word on page 118. Anxious means when you are nervous. So another name for the chapter could be like the nervous night. So something is going to happen that makes somebody anxious or nervous. All right, another word that we're going to come to is sparingly. Sparingly is something that we could talk about when we're talking about eating. We also find this word on page 118. I'm going to read the sentence to you that it comes in. It says, "The mice ate sparingly and laid aside the leftovers against the day Keith must leave the hotel." So if the mice are eating sparingly and putting leftovers away, that doesn't mean they're pigging out and eating all their food. It means they're eating just enough to kind of fill them up or make their bellies a little bit full, and then they're saving some. So they're eating a little bit. They're leaving some spares, if that makes sense. All right, another word we're going to see in the chapter is listlessly, and that word is on page 120. I'm going to read that sentence to you too. Keith is talking and he says, "Oh, hi," answered Keith listlessly. "I feel sort of awful." Now here's a picture of Keith when he's saying that. Now, if you were here, I'd ask you, does he look like he's feeling very good? No, he even says that he feels awful. So if he's saying something listlessly and he's saying that he feels awful and he looks like he does in that picture, I want you to think about when you felt sick before, where you just feel like ugh and blah and you don't want to move or do anything because you feel so sick. That's kind of what listlessly means, like he doesn't have any energy. All right, the next word is feebly, and that is going to be on page 123. The sentence it comes in says, "Keith smiled feebly and flopped down on the bed once more." So Keith is still feeling sick. So the word feeble means weak. So feebly means that he's weakly. He's feeling weak. All right, the next kind of tricky word is this word pilfering. And this word we're going to see on page 124. Now, pilfering, here Uncle Lester, Ralph's uncle, is talking. He says, "What about us?" asked Uncle Lester. "How are we going to manage if Keith doesn't bring us our meals? It isn't safe for us to go out pilfering when the housekeeper has declared war on mice." So if they need to go out pilfering and Uncle Lester is worried about them eating meals, pilfering, we can use those context clues in the story to help us know that pilfering means kind of searching for food. So when Uncle Lester's saying it isn't safe for us to go out pilfering, he's saying it isn't safe for us to go out looking for food. All right, the next word, maybe we know this word, is aspirin. We're going to see that word on page 130. So aspirin, let's see, where's the sentence? Mrs. Gridley's talking in this sentence. She says, "We had better give him an aspirin to bring down his temperature." Now, an aspirin is a type of medicine that people can take when they have a fever. It's a fever reducer. Or sometimes for aches and pains too. I'll usually take an aspirin if I have a bad headache. So an aspirin is a type of medicine. And lastly, on page 133 is the word drugstore. Now this isn't talking about bad kinds of drugs. A drugstore is a place like Walgreens or CVS where you can go and get medicine, because another word for medicine really is drugs. We usually say medicine now, but back in, some kind of older times, like when this book was written, they would just say drugs or drugstore. So on page 133, it says, how far is the nearest drugstore? So that's talking about like a place where you can buy medicine. All right, so those were the main new words I wanted to talk to you about. So now let's get started reading. We are reading chapter 10 together today, An Anxious Night, and that starts on page 118. Please remember to follow along with me in your copy of the book. It's really important that you're not just listening to me read, because it's important that you're learning these words by seeing them too. Okay, so make sure you're following along with me on page 118. Here we go. An Anxious Night. At first, Ralph's scheme worked. Keith delivered the promised bacon, toast, and jelly. The mice ate sparingly and laid aside the leftovers against the day Keith must leave the hotel. Ralph's mother continued to worry about tipping room service. I want to do the right thing, she insisted. There must be some way we could manage a tip. The mice dared not leave the nest to search for small coins that might have rolled under beds and dressers. It was late in the afternoon when Ralph heard Keith and his parents returning to their rooms. Very quietly, so that his toenails did not make scrabbling sounds in the woodwork, he slipped to the knothole and peeped out in time to see Keith flop down on the bed. Do I have to go down to the dining room for dinner? Keith asked his mother and father. I'm not hungry. Uh-oh, thought Ralph. There goes dinner. I told you not to eat that whole bag of peanuts so close to dinner time, said his father. I didn't eat all of it, said Keith. That's good, thought Ralph. At least there would be peanuts for dinner. You'll feel better after you get washed up for dinner, said Mrs. Gridley. Hurry along now. When his parents had gone into room 216, Ralph noticed that Keith seemed to drag himself off the bed. He walked to the wash basin, another word for sink, turned on the cold water, moistened his fingers, and wiped them over his face. Then he turned off the water and gave the middle of his face a swipe with the towel, which he returned to the towel rack in such a way that it immediately fell to the floor. Keith did not pick it up, but there was nothing unusual about this. Boys rarely picked up towels. What was unusual was that Keith returned to the bed, where he sat down and stared at the wall. He did not play with his cars, nor did he eat the rest of his peanuts. He just sat there. Before we keep reading, predict real quick, why do you think he's just sitting there staring at the wall? What's wrong with Keith? Think about it. All right, let's keep reading. Let's see if you're correct. Ralph stuck his head out of the knothole. Anything wrong? He asked. Oh, hi, answered Keith listlessly. I feel sort of awful. Say, that's too bad. Ralph ventured a little farther out of the knothole. I know what you mean. Thinking about the motorcycle makes me feel awful, too. All right, here's that picture I showed to you earlier. It's not that kind of awful, said Keith. I feel awful in a different way, sort of in my insides. Think you'll make it to dinner? Asked Ralph. Oh, I guess so. There was no enthusiasm or excitement in Keith's voice. Anything I can bring you? Whatever's handy, said Ralph, who hesitated to place an order when he could see that Keith did not feel like going to dinner at all. We're sort of depending on you. The housekeeper found all those sheets I had to chew through to get out of the hamper, and I understand she got pretty excited about mice. We are lying low until the whole thing blows over. A smile flickered across Keith's face. Don't worry. I won't let you down. I saved you some peanuts. I thought they might be handy for storing. Gee, thanks, said Ralph. Keith got slowly off the bed and poked the peanuts one by one through the knothole. When he had finished, Ralph popped out again and said, Thanks a lot. Keith smiled feebly, weakly, because he's not feeling good, and flopped down on the bed once more. Ralph went to work, moving the peanuts away from the knothole to make room for whatever dinner Keith brought. He felt it would be fun to be surprised by the menu this time. It was something of a shock to find that dinner, which was stuffed through the knothole much earlier than Ralph expected, consisted of a couple of broken soda crackers. Ralph poked his head out to see if more was coming, but Keith was getting into his pajamas. Aren't you going to bed pretty early? asked Ralph, realizing he had not heard Keith's parents come in. I felt so awful I couldn't eat, so they told me I'd better come up and go to bed. Keith tossed his shirt at the foot of the bed and pulled on his pajama top. When his head emerged, he said, I'm sorry about your dinner. It was the best I could do. All I had was a little soup. That's all right. Ralph was beginning to be concerned. If the boy could not eat, neither could the mice. Keith fell into bed, and Ralph ran off to report the news to his relatives. Oh, what a shame, said Ralph's mother. The poor boy. Oh dear, whatever shall we do? Cried Aunt Dorothy. Our very lives depend on him. The little cousins huddled together, big-eyed and frightened. Yes, what about us? Asked Uncle Lester. How are we going to manage if he doesn't bring us our meals? It isn't safe for us to go out pilfering when the housekeeper has declared war on mice. I knew it was a mistake to depend on people, said Aunt Sissy. We'll manage somehow, we always have. Ralph's mother was trying to be brave, but Ralph could see how worried she was. After all, he did bring us a supply of peanuts. We should be grateful for that. He didn't bring many peanuts. Uncle Lester did not sound the least bit grateful. The greedy fellow was probably ill from stuffing himself with nuts he should have saved for us. Serves him right. Now, Lester, fussed Ralph's mother, the boy had a right to eat his own peanuts, but I do wish he hadn't been quite so hungry. Ralph returned to the nut hole. Keith was lying in bed with his sports car in one hand. How do you feel now? Asked Ralph. Awful, answered Keith. Before Ralph could reply, footsteps in the hall warned him that Keith's parents were coming. He drew back inside the nut hole where he could observe without being seen. Mrs. Gridley paused by her son's bed and laid her hand on his forehead. He does feel a little warm, she remarked. He'll probably be all right in the morning, said Mr. Gridley. He just hiked too far in the sun this afternoon. I hope so. The boy's mother sounded less certain. Mr. Gridley filled a glass at the wash basin and brought it to Keith. Here, son, drink this. When Keith had drunk the water, he fell back on the pillow and closed his eyes. His parents went quietly into room 216. When it was good and dark, Ralph ventured through the nut hole. He could hear Keith breathing deeply, and he knew that he was asleep. Since he had no one to talk to, he found his little crash helmet where he had hidden it behind the curtain, and after he had adjusted the rubber band under his chin, he climbed up to the windowsill to look out into the world beyond the hotel and to dream about the lost motorcycle. From his perch on the windowsill, Ralph saw that the parking lot held more cars than usual. This meant that the motels back on the highway were full, and travelers had followed the sign pointing to the Mountain View Inn. All right, real quick, before I continue reading, here is the picture. There's Keith in bed and his mom feeling his head. All right, we are at the top of page 128 now. Okay. So all the nearby motels are full, and travelers came to the Mountain View Inn following the sign. He could hear the holiday weekend activity in the halls, too, so it's a holiday weekend. Interesting. People walking up and down, luggage being sent with a thump on the floor, keys rattling in locks. Gradually, as the night wore on, the hotel grew silent, more silent than usual, for now even the second-floor mice were quiet. There was no scurrying, scrabbling, or squeaking inside the walls. In the silence, Keith tossed in his sleep and mumbled something that sounded like motorcycle. In a moment, his mother slipped through the doorway, pulling her robe on over her nightgown. Ralph hid behind the curtain, peeping out just to see what would happen. She laid her hand on her son's forehead and muttered, "Oh, dear." Almost at once, she was joined by Keith's father, who was tying the belt to his bathrobe. "What's the trouble?" he asked. "Keith has a fever," answered the mother. "He's burning up." Ralph was shocked. The boy really was sick. It was not too many peanuts or too much hiking. The boy was really and truly sick. The father turned on the lamp on the bedside table, and he too laid his hand on the boy's forehead. Keith opened his eyes. "I'm so hot," he mumbled. "I want a drink." His mother pulled back a blanket, while the father brought a glass of water and held up his son's head so he could drink part of it. Ralph watched anxiously. But this time he was not selfishly concerned about room service. He was concerned about Keith, the boy who had saved him from a terrible fate in the wastebasket, and who had trusted him with his motorcycle. The boy who had forgiven him when he lost that motorcycle, and who had brought food, not only for Ralph, but for Ralph's whole family. "We'd better give him an aspirin to bring down his temperature," said Mrs. Gridley. Mr. Gridley started toward room 16, stopped, and snapped his fingers if he'd just remembered something. "I took the last one back in Rock Springs, Wyoming," he said. "I had a headache from driving toward the sun all afternoon. I meant to buy some more when we stopped, but I didn't think of it again until now." "Oh, I should have thought of it myself," said Mrs. Gridley. "I knew we were almost out." "Never mind, I'll get some." Mr. Gridley picked up the telephone, listened, shook his head, listened again, and said, "That's peculiar. The line seems to be dead." "They must disconnect the switchboard at night," said the mother. "But surely there's someone on duty at the desk downstairs. Every hotel has a night clerk." "I'll go find out," said the father, and slipped out the door into the hall. "I'm so hot," mumbled Keith. "I'm so hot." His mother wrung out a washcloth and cold water and laid it on her son's forehead. "You'll feel better as soon as we get you an aspirin," she whispered. The minutes dragged by. "What's keeping him?" thought Ralph. "Why doesn't he hurry?" The old hotel snapped and creaked. Keith rolled and tossed, trying to find a cool spot on the pillow, and his mother wrung out the washcloth and more cold water. "When's Dad coming?" asked Keith, his eyes bright and his cheeks flushed. "In a minute," soothed his mother. "He'll be here in a minute." "I wish he would hurry," thought Ralph. Still the minutes dragged. Finally, footsteps were heard in the hall, and Mr. Gridley returned to room 215. "He's here with the aspirin," whispered Mrs. Gridley to Keith. "At last," thought Ralph. "I thought he would never come." But Mr. Gridley shook his head. "There isn't an aspirin to be found anyplace." He sounded thoroughly exasperated. "First of all, the night clerk was sound asleep on a couch in the lobby. I had a dickens of a time waking him up, and when I finally did manage to, he couldn't find any aspirin anywhere." "Oh, no!" exclaimed the mother. "Oh, no!" echoed Ralph's thoughts. "What about that little gift shop off the lobby?" asked Mrs. Gridley. "It must sell aspirin." "Locked up tight, and the clerk went home with the key," answered Mr. Gridley. "Oh, dear." "The night clerk was really very nice about it," said the father. "He even came up and looked in the housekeeper's office." "How far's the nearest drugstore?" 25 miles back on the main highway," answered the father, "and it closed at 10 o'clock and doesn't open until 9 in the morning." The mother held her watch under the lamp. "And it's almost 1 o'clock. It's hours until morning." She crossed the room to wring out the washcloth again. "What will we do?" What can we do?" asked the father helplessly. "I even telephoned the doctor, but there has been a bad accident back on the highway and he can't come. The night clerk said he would telephone the milkman before he starts his route at 6 and ask him if he can bring some aspirin, but he won't get here until 7 or later. All we can do is wait." Keith tossed under the cold washcloth. "Mom, I think I'd like to go to sleep now," he muttered thickly. "I guess that is all you can do," said his mother, and bent over to kiss his hot forehead before she turned out the light. Ralph did not even wait for the boy's parents to leave the room. As soon as the light was out, he leaped silently to the carpet, and by the time they'd gone through the doorway into room 216, he had hidden his little crash helmet behind the curtain and was halfway through the knothole. Somewhere, someplace in that hotel, there must be an aspirin tablet, and Ralph was going to find it. He only wished he had the motorcycle so he could travel faster. All right, that is the end of chapter 10. So we'll have to see what happens, if Ralph will be able to find an aspirin, if Keith will start feeling better. We'll have to see what happens tomorrow in chapter 11, or actually on Monday. You'll see what happens in chapter 11. All right, so here's what you're going to do now. You're going to be working on 2 pages about chapter 10 in your packet and on Google Classroom. Remember that whatever pages are in the packet, you can also find on our Google Classroom. They're the same pages, so what you're going to do is you're going to write on like the hard copies of the pages that are in the packet. And when you're finished, you'll take a picture of it and upload it into the assignment on Google Classroom to turn it in so that I can grade it. All right, and part of those 2 pages today, part of one of the pages is talking about compound words. Now, if you're in my class, we've talked some about compound words, and I'm going to teach you a little bit about it now. A compound word is when 2 small words go together to make one bigger word. Now, sometimes these 2 words have nothing to do with each other, and when they go together to make one word, they make a word that has a totally different meaning. So I'm going to give you a few examples now. All right, so we've got the word hot. You know, hot means like hot in temperature, sweaty. And here we've got the word dog, like a puppy. Hot and dog don't have anything to do with each other, but when they go together, they make one word, hot dog. A hot dog that you can eat. This isn't meaning like a hot animal, a hot dog. It's meaning the hot dog that you eat. So this is a compound word. 2 small words that go together to make one big word. All right, here's a few more. All right, we've got the word pony, like a small horse. And we've got the word tail, like a lot of animals have a tail. But together, it's not talking about a pony's tail, it's talking about a ponytail that people can wear in their hair. Ponytail. All right, next we have the word cup that you would, oops, it's upside down, that you would drink out of. We've got the word board, like a piece of wood. But when we put them together, we actually don't say cupboard, we say cupboard. A cupboard, you probably have one in your kitchen where you put your dishes in the cupboard. All right, I've got 2 more examples left. Next one, we have the word pan, like something you would cook with in your kitchen. And the word cake, you guys know what cake is. But together, it makes pancake. So 2 small words make one big word. That's a compound word. All right, last compound word, and this one was in the story. We've got the word wash, like, you know, cleaning yourself or cleaning dishes or something. And the word cloth. A cloth is like a small towel or a small piece of fabric. Together is the word washcloth, which is like a tiny towel. That's what they were putting on Keith's head when he was feeling sick. So on the second page of the chapter 10 worksheets that you're going to do now, it's talking about compound words. 2 small words that go together to make one big one. You're going to find the correct compound word to fit the sentence. All right, thank you for reading chapter 10 with me today. I really hope you're enjoying The Mouse and the Motorcycle. We only have 3 chapters left. When we finish those 3 chapters, we're going to do a little bit of a cool book report that I think you guys are gonna like, and then we're gonna be taking a test over the whole book, The Mouse and the Motorcycle, and that's gonna be online. We haven't taken online tests like about books and reading lessons before, so that'll be something new for us. So that's coming up, so please make sure you're staying on track, reading the chapters with us and not getting behind, okay? I miss you guys so much, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.